Radar was a university nickname from Selwyn College. And then I started doing comedy sort of at the end of '93, still using the nickname. And by the time I realised that it had become a brand as much as a nickname, it was too late. And I did have several months of sitting down thinking, oh God, should I change it back to Andrew Lumsden, or should I stick with Radar? And really through procrastination and laziness, it just kind of stuck. And by then it was too late. And then I changed it when I was on tour with Mike King. I changed it to Tear Radar because I was opening for Mike on a couple of big national tours, and I wanted to perform a me. So I sort of marified it by simply adding Tear to the front, because my email address was The Radar, and I simply took the H out. Pulp Comedy, it brought the fact into people's lounges that there was more to comedy in New Zealand than bad sitcoms and Billy T. James, who wasn't making anything because he was dead. You know, it suddenly just, people realised that there was this live comedy scene out there that they could go to. And I think it is probably one of the most important comedy programs ever to have happened in terms of making the general standard of comedy in New Zealand on screen and live better than what it would have been. There was one record, one of the early series, I had to do the same piece of material 3 times in front of the same audience. Unheard of. You know, you might have to record a couple of extra lines, but for some reason, I think the first record there was an audio problem, so I had to go back out and do it again. Everyone's heard the jokes, you know, and then to have to go back out and do it the same night in front of the same crowd for the 3rd time was diabolical. But I think a really good thing in retrospect, because it then gave you the presence. You actually had to go, actually, I'm doing it for the cameras. I'm not doing it for this live audience. They can put some laughter in at the end and mix it up. My performance is for the people at home. It was a documentary about statistics. Possibly the most boring project you could ever hope to think of. But because of all the research and whatnot that Mark had brought out, it became a really fascinating sort of thing. People loved it. You know, they said, how could you make statistics interesting? Well, statistics are inherently interesting by the fact that statistics are fascinating. Numbers and ratios and things, but on a television screen, you know, a pie graph is only so interesting. They were shooting from the roof of the Heritage Hotel in Christchurch, and I was in Cathedral Square having to do these various takes, and walking across a square where there's no obvious camera talking to yourself, that takes a lot of getting over for someone who's a bit self-conscious of themselves, like me, because people look at you as if you've got some kind of mental problem. And you can't really go, oh, there's a camera up there on the thing. You just keep walking across the square talking. Fascinating kind of program, though. B&B is one of those great shows that you have every once in a while and that no one ever sees, other than people in Motueka. Every time I go to Motueka, there's always a B&B fan, and a different one. It was very tight turnaround television. You were trying to create an entirely new sitcom in a way every week to be recorded live in front of a studio audience with guests who'd never been in anything like that, politicians and sports people, and then try to tie them into this storyline that then tied into this fictional B&B that you were running. Whether it worked, I don't really know. It was an inordinate amount of fun most of the time. I think there was going to be an anniversary or a wedding or something. I said, I want to get married in a suit of armour. And so by the end of the week, we had a suit of armour, and I was being married again to Horty, who's always had a dream of walking down the aisle to, oh, what was the song? Tina Cross, Nothing But Dreams. And I have a feeling, I think we even had Tina Cross singing Nothing But Dreams. So Horty and I got to live out this wedding fantasy, simply because the people at MTS gave us this total creative freedom. The only sort of feedback that came back was to use more reo, try to fit more language in, which we did. Marley was marvellous, and it was marvellous just to be on Intrepid Journey, because from what I'd heard, I'd been turned down for years and years and years at TVNZ. Fortunately, New Zealand being the small country it is, they ran out of the pool of reasonably well-known people, and then they ran out of the people who were sort of a little bit known, and then they got to people like me. And I had a choice of, I think I could have gone to Borneo to look at orangutans, which I love. I love orangutans, but then I realised there'd be a lot of walking through the jungle and leeches and things that crawl into your bits at night when you sleep, and that wasn't for me. My immediate reaction was, oh my God, I'm going to die. But having remembered the words of my sister, there was no way I was going to start blubbing on camera and complaining about it. I was finding it hard to breathe, and I didn't know whether it was anaphylactic shock or just hysteria when I was hyperventilating with fear. And I thought, well, I can't, not on camera, I can't cry, because, you know, if this is the last piece of footage that's ever recorded of me, I want it to be awesome. I want it to look as if people went, wow, he was dying, and he just went, oh, well, how hilarious is this? How intrepid. And then we went and found the guy who hosted the thing, and I'd killed the scorpion. I went, oh, I've been stung by a scorpion. And he sort of looked and went, oh, you know, baby scorpion. And I thought, oh, maybe that's worse. And then he offered me an aspirin. You know when you make it and you're living in a field and it's raining and you've got your hand stuck inside a goat carcass that you're trying to skin, you don't think, who's going to want to watch this? And I never considered what the audience would be. And then it started screening, and it was immensely popular with children. And I really liked the fact that on 2 at the time, I think they had The Zoo, which was a cute program about furry animals. And then opposite that was me with a cute program about furry animals, many of which I then killed and ate. And the children of New Zealand seemed to go, yep, that's the program for us. It was never made as a comedy. Every time I'd try to say, hey, should we do something? It was never filmed as a comedy as a program per se. And I think in some ways the success of it was that the humour, because it was thus secondary, was allowed to just be there. There was no forced humour. There was no reshots of something to make it more funny. A lot of it just happened because I'm a bit incompetent, or because there is a natural sort of thing. And I think there was a love to the program. I certainly really loved meeting the people. And I think if you can bring that across, that you are really interested in what these people are, I think that comes across. You can't fake that. I think we're about to go through a new golden era of television comedy. There's a whole lot of stuff that's about to come on air that I think is being made by comedians. You know, 7 Days, which is on at the moment and is rating really well, is comedians on a comedy panel show. There was a belief in New Zealand for a period of time that a comedy panel show should have celebrities on it. And God bless them, they're not comedians. And the greatest writers in the world are not going to be able to get them to have that depth of spontaneous comedy. The Jackie Brown Diaries, really, really interesting comedic program. A Night at the Classic is about to come out. I'm going to be really fascinated to see what that happens. You know, a comedy with comedians, made by comedians. Jeremy Wells has done a lot of stuff for a while. Birdland, it's still got that sort of satirical eating media lunch type thing going on. A really underrated show, The Pretender. Was it The Pretender? Yeah, with about the election campaign. Great, you know, Andre King, a comedian who came through, was one of the stars of the show. The lead, for God's sake, unheard of in New Zealand, a stand-up comedian, Bob McLaren, New Zealander who works over in Amsterdam, brought him back, probably because he's unknown in New Zealand. Fantastic. So I think there has been a recognition that comedians are more than guys standing on stage talking about their penis. We do that a lot. But having said that, you know, there is more strings to our bow.